Nerd Hatters. I am here with Danielle Goldwert. Am I saying that correctly, Danielle?
Yes.
She is the writer, director, producer, artist, and almost everything else for the film Waterlogged. It's an animated short that premiered, right, at River Run International Film Festival. I mean, I'm sure you showed it to some of your friends and family, but officially
Official premiere.
premiered
Yeah.
at River Run International Film Festival this past week. And Will and I got a chance to see it in person and to talk to Danielle afterwards. So she agreed to come on the podcast. And thank you for taking a few minutes out of your busy schedule for us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, how'd you get here? You told me a little bit of your story when we talked in person, but how did NYU Ed Psych? Did I get that right? An Ed Psych major?
Social psych.
Social psych. I'm sorry. Social psych. I was close. How did a social psychology major at NYU end up doing a stop motion animation film?
Well, this process actually started back when I was an undergrad psych student at University of Miami. So that was back in 20. I mean, I started there in 2017, but 2020 during the pandemic, that was when this film kind of was born or started being born. And it kind of came about. I've always been interested in stop motion. I've always kind of like dabbled in it and loved watching it and reading about it. And then having so many hours trapped inside my apartment just seemed like the perfect opportunity to say, like, all right, let's write a story, let's figure something out, and just start building and buying the camera lenses and just start experimenting with it. So obviously it had nothing to do with, well, I can't say it had nothing to do with what I was studying. I study psychology, but I study the psychological underpinnings of climate action. So as you'll know from the plot of the movie, it's about a climate scholar confronting their environmental despair. And that was something that I was obviously familiar with and interested in researching throughout my academic career. And I also was majoring in art. So it kind of seemed like the perfect natural blend of those two interests.
So, were you minoring in psych there at Miami,
I
or was it
was
double?
Well, I was double majoring in psychology and art and minoring in philosophy, English literature, business management, and political science. So,
Okay,
yeah, it kind of
quite a bit.
somehow blended all my interests. Yeah, there's a bit of philosophy, existentialism in there, political, English writing. Yeah, it kind of all fit together.
So on the artistic side, I noticed from your Instagram you also like to paint. Are there any other mediums that you work with outside of stop motion now and painting?
I was really into sculpting for a while. I guess sculpting kind of goes with stop motion. And I credit a lot of the courses I took in my undergrad art career as like helping me develop the skills I would eventually need to learn how to. I was sculpting full size, and then I had to
Hmm.
teach myself how to do that in miniature. But yeah, I mean, some of my paintings I actually ended up using as kind of like inserts into the stop motion film. So it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
kind of a cool way to blend both of my interests in that sense. But I've always loved anything crafty, anything I can do with my hands. So whether that's painting, sculpting, scrapbooking, whatever it is, I just love learning new techniques and experimenting with that sort of thing.
So on the stop motion side, you mentioned that you had always been intrigued by and enjoyed stop motion films. Do you have particular studios or films that you enjoy? You know, Wallace and Gromit is an easy one to point to. A lot of people know Wallace and Gromit, but were there any others, or was that one that influenced you at all?
I really love the Leica studio, and I watch anything they put on YouTube with their behind the scenes or how did they do it. I spent hours and hours trying to study their techniques, and I love Fantastic Mr. Fox. So
Mm.
I had a book about the making of that, which was really informative for for my process. And Charlie Kaufman's one of my favorite directors, writers of all time. So of course, Anomalisa was a huge inspiration for me as well.
To my shame, I have not caught up with those two yet. I remember hearing about them. I was like, I'm gonna make it out to see that, and it's on my list. Both of those
Yeah,
are on my
highly
list.
recommend.
So you, I believe Wes Anderson, was he the one that did Fantastic Mr. Fox? Is that correct?
Yep.
Are you a Wes fan in general, or just more that specific movie?
Oh yeah, no, I love all of his movies, and I don't know if I guess it didn't come through so much in Waterlogged. I could talk a little bit more about who and what did inspire it, which once
Hmm.
I tell you would be very obvious. But I'm definitely always thinking of Wes Anderson anytime I set up the perfect symmetrical shot, or I always like to think about he has such a distinct visual style, and I try to kind of find my own style while also taking inspiration from him and the other artists that I admire.
I know I'm probably remembering this wrong. Did he also do Isle of Dog? or was that a
Yep.
different filmmaker? He
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Okay,
That
I
was
thought
also
so. I thought so.
incredible stop motion.
I also need to catch up with that. Yeah, so many movies out there. I tell you.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So Wes Anderson was an influence, particularly his stop motion work. And so on the more on the ideological side, in terms of your understanding of climate science and climate change, the climate crisis, like what were some of the beginnings of that for you? Did they go back to like elementary school days, a little further up than that, or like how did that
The
grow over
most
time?
the moment that really struck me of like, oh my God, this is important. This is something we should all be paying attention to was actually seeing Paul Schrader's First Reformed, which if you haven't seen it or if you just look up anything about it, you'll see that I totally ripped off so much of that movie because I just love it so, so much. But that movie was about a priest who is also experiencing this despair and crisis of faith when he's thinking about the environmental crisis and what have we done to God's creation, stuff like that. So it was a
Interesting.
huge inspiration for me in this film. And then also in my own personal life, that was the moment where I had my own, I mean, not in a religious way, but just that moment of thinking like, yeah, what are we doing to this earth? We had this paradise and now we're destroying it. And what does that mean for future generations and for the prospect of having children? That was the first moment that I remember really starting to think about those questions. And that was back whenever that came out. So not
Yeah, I'm
too,
trying to remember it. I
I
remember
was in
hearing
college,
about it, and that's
I
with
think. So it was pretty
Heath.
later down the road in my life. I didn't grow up being so passionate about these issues.
That was with Ethan Hawke was the actor in that, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love his work. He's so good. I
Yeah.
love how he talks about art as well. Just talks about it almost as nourishment, as a form of
Right.
nourishment, as like as a necessity. I like his stuff.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
love
I know
watching.
it hasn't been too long. I think within the last 5 years, if memory serves me.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
could be wrong though.
But yeah, man, I studied frame by frame of that film in the making of my film. So I might have seen it.
2017,
Yeah, that makes
2017.
sense.
So yeah, it's been a minute.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I just love it. I must have seen it at least 50 times now. That might even be a conservative guess. Like I would just watch it on repeat multiple times a day in the process
Hmm.
of trying to figure out what to do with my own film.
Now, obviously, it's in narrative format, but did it get into some of the science as well, some of the data? Did it find a way to weave? Did the filmmaker find a way to weave it in, or the scriptwriter? I guess both hand.
Into First Reformed, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely some monologues, and there's a character in that film who kind of represents. He kind of starts the priest on his own journey, thinking about this sort of thing, and he tells him all these facts, and he's communicating the science and the urgency, and telling stories about these activists. And you could see behind him in the shots, there's some data and figures and charts. And so I tried to do something similar in my own film. In the academic space, there's a ton of climate scholars and environmental psychologists that I really admire whose work that I wanted to incorporate into my film if possible. And so, like the Yale program for climate communication or Dr. Elke Weber at Princeton, those are just two examples of researchers I really admire. And so there are certain shots in my film where you could see in miniature some of their own data and papers that I really liked, or some of the
Oh,
ones that
nice.
kind of got me started in my own journey as an environmental psychologist.
Okay, and nice segue. Speaking of that, that grew into you wanting to study the psychological aspect of it. Did that interest come while you were still at Miami, or was this more NYU days?
This was early on in Miami, about uh, partway through my first year there. Well, my freshman year at Miami started with Hurricane Irma, which ended up sending us home
Hmm.
for a few weeks, and it devastated large parts of southern Florida. And so that was a very vivid and immediate impact of climate change. The storms are being worsened by the climate crisis that a lot of people don't tend to experience or don't tend to make the connection that it might have been worse because of the way the climate's changing. So that was a
Hmm.
moment for me that kind of struck home a bit. And then the summer after my freshman year, I ended up doing a research internship with this lab at Cambridge in England, that was one of the earlier academic teams that I can recall studying the psychological side of climate change, which was something that I wasn't even aware of at the time was a thing. I always knew
Hmm.
I like psychology, I like the brain, I like human behavior, but I wasn't really sure how to apply it or what I wanted to do or focus on. And then as soon as I discovered this lab, I was like, okay, this is it. Like, this is something that will be meaningful, and I can be really passionate about trying to actually apply my knowledge and my research and potentially or hopefully make a difference to this major real world social issue. So, yeah, it was pretty much starting from that summer after my freshman year. And then I went back to Miami and I joined a bunch of research labs. And there weren't any labs in psychology studying climate change at Miami, but I was able to make a connection with the primary investigators. And I just told them, like, look, I only really care about studying the climate crisis at this point, and they worked with me to set up my own experiments and were really great and supportive mentors and letting me kind of do my own thing. So yeah, it's been quite a few years now, I guess, since 2018 that I've been studying this and thinking about it. So I've had a lot of time to get familiar with the literature and kind of meet the leaders in the field and immerse myself in this line of thinking.
Did it involve a good bit of survey work with the research that you did? What were I'm probably getting the wrong term, but what was the mode of research or
Yeah,
the
the
approach
majority of my
to?
research now is online survey work.
Mhm.
But this summer, I'm actually going back to Cambridge, kind of where it all started, and conducting a field study to replicate some of my online findings and see if they will translate to the field. And I always try to think about, because online, yeah, this is a little off topic from my film, but I'll just be brief.
Okay.
Online findings don't always translate to the real world because if you ask somebody, like, are you willing to recycle, or do you care about climate change, or even like, will you take this major action, it's much easier to say, yeah, sure, okay, versus when
Hmm.
you actually try to measure it and see if people do that, do their intentions match their actions.
Hmm.
Oftentimes they don't. And so we've been thinking a lot more about how to test things in a more ecologically valid way.
Yeah, I don't mind going down these rabbit trails a little bit. We at Nerdhead here, we like to nerd out about things that we enjoy, and science is one that I love, and in particular, the field of ecology is one that's part of what piqued my interest about your film, and so I was excited to meet you and your supporters as well after. And it sounded like you had obviously your boyfriend was there with you, correct? Yes, and another good friend that they had come along and supported you in your journey
Yeah.
of the filmmaking. And you said it took you 4 years total, correct?
Yeah. So the funny part is, I didn't even know my now boyfriend or the girl I brought, one of my best friends. I only met them pretty much during the final year of the process of making that film. So I just mentioned it, like, yeah, I've got this side project I've been working on and off since quarantine. And then the girl, my friend Alex, she was really instrumental, and like, I showed it to her and I was like, yeah, I don't really know how to finish it. I don't know. It was really fun to make, but what am I gonna do with it? Who's gonna watch it anyway? And she really pushed me to be like, Danielle, this is something, like, you should finish it. She sat with me, and it was, I think I mentioned, I had looked at it so many times for so many hours at that point that just having a set of fresh eyes on it to say, someone other than my family who is so sick of my questions by now and saying, like, what do you think, this frame or this frame, this shot or this shot, they don't know, they don't care. So having someone who's interested in this sort of thing, who is willing to sit down with me and go through that process and iterate different ideas and suggestions. She doesn't like when I give her so much credit, but like, I think it was pretty instrumental in helping me finish the film.
I feel like every artist, it's so hard. My wife's a professional painter, and I know just watching her journey, and it's so hard to advocate for yourself sometimes. Like when you're creating art, I feel like I've heard so many artists talk about that it's difficult to be your own cheerleader
Yeah.
because it feels so close and so personal. You're like putting this out. It's like putting a child out in the world naked or something, or your inner child maybe in some ways out in the world naked. And you're like,
Right.
wait, come back. I need to clothe you, or whatever the case might be. So that's awesome that you had some cheerleaders and some helpers there to help you get across the finish line, so to speak. Did she push for you to submit it to a film festival, or was that, how did that come about? Like the idea to submit
Yeah,
to
I
River Run?
mean, I showed it to a few friends afterwards, and they were all very supportive. They all liked it a lot, which was a big relief to me because I was like, I don't know. It's like, here, I spent 4 years on this, but maybe it sucks. I don't know. Like, you tell me. And everyone was like, no, it's really good. And I still wasn't sure if they actually meant it, or, of course, what else are they going to say? But the next logical thing seems to be like, okay, you made something good. You have to share it with the world now. You have to try to get it out there. So I submitted it to quite a few film festivals. So far, River Run has been the biggest one, the only one.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still waiting to hear back from quite a few. And
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I was really excited. I wasn't familiar with River Run before that, but like Alex, she's from North Carolina. I have a few other friends in the industry who are from that area, and they try to communicate to me like how big of a deal River Run is and what an honor it should be. And of course, I was very honored to get in to any festival. But once I realized, the quality and the caliber, especially seeing the other films that got in, I started to really appreciate, like, okay, I made something pretty good, I guess, because
So yeah, this is a
being,
big deal. I got into
yeah,
like
that was a
Oscar
nice feeling.
qualifying too.
Yeah, that was, I didn't really know what that meant. When I told some family members, they're like, "Oh, what? You're nominated for an Oscar?" It's like, "No, back up."
Not quite.
Yeah, but it was still nice to get yeah, to get into this festival, and it was a really amazing experience getting to attend and watch the film, and people in the audience chuckled at the right moments, and they all seemed to enjoy it. So that was just like a really special and relief that people liked it.
So what would you say, like as you were teaching yourself how to do this new form of art, was there a particular skill you had to learn that was the most challenging or that took the longest?
Yes, there were quite a few skills that I had to teach myself that were quite a challenge. Like I said, sculpting. I taken one semester of sculpting in clay in college, um, which I then had to try to translate to a much, much smaller scale. And I know a lot of claymation or stop motion animation will do like a less realistic style because it's easier to animate that way. But I
Mm-hmm.
was committed to trying to sculpt a very perfect, realistic looking head, which took just months and months to do that and went through multiple iterations. I taught myself how to sew my grandmother's sewing machine that had been sitting in the basement, and I sewed this character an entire wardrobe. Some outfits didn't even make it into the film. I just made them just in case. At one point, I sewed the same pair of jeans. He only wears one pair of pants, but I sewed it like 18 different times because I couldn't get it to fit right and it was driving me crazy. So, yeah, I had a lot of fun. I mean, I did it for fun, but at times it did feel torturous, but I enjoyed it.
Mm.
And then, of course, actually learning to animate this puppet, which it was the first time I was using an armature, and I had watched a lot of videos on how to do it and using the tie down method and all these different methods to do a walk cycle, which is notoriously one of the hardest things to do in all forms of animation. And I can't say I quite mastered it in this film. I tried to just do some sneaky editing and cuts around it because it's really hard, especially as a one woman show, kind of trying to do the animating and then hit the camera button and do all the filming at the same. It might have been easier if I had one other person there to help me, but yeah, I did the best that I could, and maybe for my next film I will be able to nail that stop the walk cycle.
Wait, I feel like so much of these art forms and really so much in life, you got to jump in and start doing it. And
Yeah,
I mean, you can study it to a certain extent beforehand, but especially with the more hands-on mediums, you got to get in and get your hands dirty, essentially.
right, which was frustrating to me as kind of a perfectionist. I want everything to be perfect the first time I do it, and then
Mm-hmm.
obviously 4 years later I've developed a lot of skills and things I just didn't even know about when I first started. And so now looking back, that was part of why it was taking so long to finish, is every year I would learn something new or find some new technique or technology and then go back and redo a bunch of scenes or find something like, oh, I think I could do that better now, and I'd be so tempted to redo it. And then eventually I was like, okay, this film's good, the next film can be even better now. So that was kind of something I had to force myself to accept, that it's just going to get better. This one won't be the best thing you ever make. You'll have to just wait for the next one.
How big did the final figure version of the main character? How big was the figure actually?
Like this big? Is
Pretty
that?
small. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, very small. The whole set, I don't have it here. The whole set is sitting in just like one of those little storage bins now in my parents' basement. So everything is very small, and it started with me in my apartment in Miami, and then I was living back in my parents' house in New Jersey for part of it. So the whole set moved with me there. And then I spent pretty much an entire year traveling abroad. I took a gap year before starting grad school. So that year was mostly just editing footage online. And then I was still working on it when I moved into my first apartment in New York City. And I think I actually ended up shooting a little bit more footage there. Yeah,
Okay.
there are multiple locations in terms of the sets that I built. And then I also filmed those sets in multiple locations around the country. So it's kind of interesting in that way.
As you're watching like the final product, do you still have memories of like, oh yeah, I filmed that scene when I was here. I filmed it this scene in New York, this scene in Miami. Like, did you remember
Oh,
some of
yeah.
that, or was it
I
more fluid than that?
No, I remember every single frame of every single shot. I spent hours and hours and hours on every millisecond of that footage. I could remember. Yeah, I remember all of it, and I liked it. But I remember exactly what I was doing that day and what was going on. And for a lot of it, I was just listening to I was still in college, so I was kind of just putting in my headphones and listening to my online classes, kind of like
Hmm.
audiobooking them while making my movie.
There you
So
go.
I can actually still remember like sometimes which class I was listening to while making certain shots. It's kind of funny.
That makes sense. That makes sense. It's like the audio and then the sensory kind of all tying together. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, so you mentioned that you got submissions to a number of other film festivals, still waiting to hear back from some. Is there anywhere in the climate science world where you hope or like to show this? I know it's more personal. It's kind of exploring the inner psychology of someone who's kind of wrestling with these existential questions of what are we going to do? What can we do? Someone has to do something. I can imagine that would resonate with a lot of people who have been working in that field for a time. Have you had thoughts about? I don't know if it would be like a conference. I don't know what that would look like, but have you had thoughts about seeing if anyone wanted to see it in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely tapping into a feeling that a lot of people in my field would relate to. So in that sense, they'd be interested in it. I actually will be presenting it in my lab meeting this week because nobody, I guess, a lot of people in my academic life didn't know that I had this whole other side thing going on, and so I just told everyone last week, like, yeah, I'm going out of town. I'm going to a film festival to premiere my stop motion film. I'm like, what? Like
Yeah,
nobody
like
had
what?
any idea that I was doing that. But they know I've got like painting. They know I've got a bunch of random other
That
side
you like
things.
to do art? Yeah.
Yeah, so it checked out. Um, but yeah, everyone's excited to see it. So I'll show it to my lab mates. I do plan on sending it to those people whose data was featured in the film. I just
Mm-hmm.
haven't gotten around to it yet. But yeah, I mean, it's not the normal academic type of thing you'd see
Right.
presented at a conference. But I think what I was mentioning to you when we spoke at River Run was a lot of my work now is finding that it's really important to tap into this emotional side of people when you're trying to convince them to care about the climate or to take action, change their motivations. And
Mm-hmm.
so, one way to do that might be through this sort of immersive, or at least more immersive than our online stimuli video formats. I will say that in our most recent study, we found that inducing positive emotions about the climate is one of the best ways to go, at least when you pair it with a sense of efficacy. And I can't say that my film is targeting positive emotions. So I don't know if it's the best way to try to convince the public to care. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not actively advertising it in my sort of academic world, but I think there could be an interest.
It could help people that who already care and who are already taking action. It could be a
Right.
form of it could be therapeutic in some ways, like a form of processing some of those emotions, as art often helps us to do. I think.
Yeah,
But yeah,
definitely.
maybe your next one could be more on the positive realm. And I don't know. I know you
Maybe.
said you have another concept. I don't know if you want to talk about it yet. Still hush hush
I'll hold
or
off on it. Yeah, it's still a work
yeah.
in progress.
I understand. I understand. Well,
But
cool. Well,
that
I think
one will
we're
similarly be, I guess I can say, it definitely won't be like a positive. I'm very interested in kind of philosophical questions around like existentialism and dread and absurdity, the absurdity of existence. And so those are the
hmm,
sorts of questions I'm interested in. I don't think the next film will be about climate issues specifically, but it'll definitely fit into the same tone or tapping into similar sorts of questions.
I tend to be a sucker for those as well. Although I have to measure how much I partake.
Right. Yeah, there's enough.
I have to find a balance because yeah, I can go down
Right.
that rabbit hole, and it's. But yeah, I think there's value in noting the feelings and being able to understand and process them too. Well, I think we're coming up on our time here. Is there any final things you'd like to share with our listeners about your film or?
I mean, if anyone wants to watch it, I'd be super thrilled to hear your feedback. Any thoughts? It's really nice now that it's out in the world a little bit, or at least some people got to see it. It's not publicly available online yet because, like I said, still waiting to hear back from some film festivals. But yeah, thank you for listening, and thank you for having me on the podcast. This is my first podcast and first time talking about the film in this way, so it's really nice
Awesome.
to get to talk with people who are interested and actually know what stop motion is because usually that's the sort of level of understanding people are at. So this is really nice.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, we love movies and film. We have not covered a stop motion film yet,
Hmm.
so technically this is our first stop motion film that we've covered. But yeah, I mean, there's so many options over the years, so we'll get there.
Yeah.
Maybe with like a Fantastic Mr. Fox or Isle of Dog, one of those entries. Well, Danielle, thank you, listeners. If you happen to catch this while it's still playing at the River Run virtually, it's there, riverrunfilm.com. and you can purchase a ticket. It's to the entire selection of shorts for the animated, I think it's Animated Shorts Program 2. And
Mhm.
her film is, I think, towards the end of the selection there. And virtual tickets will be available through April 20th. Danielle is the best place for them if you want followers. Would it be, did you want to mention your Instagram or there? Do you want folks to
Yeah,
follow you
sure.
there?
I've got, well, I tend to start new Instagrams for all my hobbies. So I've got one that's just anything I'm up to. It's D Goldwert. And then if you want to see my paintings, that's Danielle Goldwert. And I had one just for stop motion. We'll see if I end up posting there again. But that was Goldwert_stop motion. And maybe
Okay.
one day I'll just consolidate them all into one umbrella.
Makes sense. All right.
Yeah.
But probably I know the one you posted about the film was D Goldwert. So
Yeah,
would that be
that
most
tends to be my main
likely
one.
any future news about it? Like if you got into a new festival,
Yeah, yeah,
that'd
yeah.
be
If
where
you
they
want
would
to
hear about it.
hear, yeah, that's probably the place to go if you want to stay up to date on this film.
Awesome. Well, good luck with that and with your continued studies at
Thank you.
the, is it doctorate level or just a
Doctorate level.
doctorate level? Nice. Nice. I had a friend who just got his PhD recently. I know how rigorous and challenging that can be. So good luck with that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a long haul, but it's fun.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the Nerd Hat podcast and I guess, it's a pleasure for us to be your very first interview. So that's
Yeah,
pretty awesome.
thanks.
Hopefully you'll get more in the future.
Hopefully.
Fingers crossed. All right. Thank you.